Fancy meeting you here. Hi guys. Hi Sean. Hi David. Um, we need a countdown. I've been saying it for over a year now. Um, so I made a post very late last night for Patreon, talking about that we just sent out a couple thousand beautiful macabre books and mentioning the Animalia Kickstarter and asking, oh, what should we talk about tonight? And then when I went to post it, it asked me for my login information and I didn't remember it and I was on my phone. So I didn't post it. And so Chandra posted that for us this morning. So hello to everyone who's here. Thank you for joining us. Um, but post in the comments what we should be talking about, and we'll cover it. The main thing that I've been doing, I've been working on the Jugendstil 3 book. And the Animalia book is going to go really quickly because most of that's done. Um, but I'm about to re-submerge heavily into the Caligula work to be able to finish the Terci book. And when I'm working on something like that, it's not easy to pull away to do multiple things. You're juggling just vast amounts of information to try to fit just the tiniest bit through a keyhole. And so it takes up all my bandwidth. So that's what I've been working on is Jugendstil and then getting the Anton Cedar book out. Oh, Sean, thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. That's kind of like the Terci book. That's an example of something that got away from me in terms of when we talked about doing it. The idea was just going to be, oh well, let's just do it as a hardcover. We've got these images in higher resolution. Let's just make it a little larger. And then as I was getting into it, I just felt like it was leaning a little too grotesque, a little too much military, art. Not in a way of like a political military, but meaning gruesome. Not like a horror movie, but in a real world way. It just felt a little heavy on that side. And then on the inverse, there were so many posters that we didn't include, including a lot that I'd gathered after that book was published, that were, like some of the Joseph Fenneker stuff, things that were beautiful as well as macabre. And so I did work really hard on that book, and I knew that if we rushed it out, it wasn't going to be great, but I feel like it's great now. So I'm very happy when someone with great taste as yourself likes it, because it kind of makes me feel less crazy for digging my heels in on my timelines with stuff. But yeah, I'm really happy with it, and I'm imagine that you noticed the difference in things. I would be curious to know, Sean, if there are any of the posters that are in this one that weren't in the old one, that you really liked. I'd be curious. Another thing is, if for some of the people here, when I talk about the Terci book, there's a Caligula behind the scenes book that we've been working on The photographer's name is Mario Terzi, and that is something that'll be out this summer, summer slash early fall. And it's a couple years overdue. But part of it was that I needed to really time that with the release of the movie. New things kind of kept helping me make the book better. And so the point when it won't get better exponentially is now. Like from this point forward, I've got everything I need to make it perfect. The Animalia book I mentioned is a Kickstarter that we just did. It's basically Art Nouveau dragons and other creatures. I probably mentioned it in earlier posts. Um, and what else did I mention? Animalia, Tercy. Oh, Kat has asked me to tell everyone. Yes, the Jugendstil 2 book is done. I don't think that'll ship for another 3 weeks or so, because we don't have them here. But yeah, but that book is done, and so that's exciting. That's the reason I'm working on the third book right now is I'm in the zone on Jugendstil. The third book will complete 1896. And then this way, when Chandra runs that campaign, the book will actually ship relatively quickly because it'll be done. I'm sure someone pulled that up because we take a lot of pride on our packing. Every time I get a book in the mail, just got this beautiful book from Germany, and they shipped this big hardcover book just in a paper envelope, and of course it came mangled. And so we do take the packing really seriously. So it means a lot to me that you notice and appreciate it. That is all Melissa. That is Melissa. She's super, super militant about it and takes it really seriously. So yeah, that will put a smile on her face. So thank you. Oh, thank you, David. Yeah, we try to even, one thing, if people have been getting our packages recently, with the Le Pater hardcover is when we really shifted into the packaging branding. And so the idea that the box has things printed on it started then. Hi, Russell. And the other thing that we've been doing, which is, just kind of a silly thing, but I love it, is designing packing tape. It's one of my small joys in life. But I just feel like that just makes such a cool difference. I kind of like the idea that when it shows up at your house, it's like, it's a little more exciting because there's, you know, the packing tape for the first Jugendstil book was pretty interesting. A palette people aren't used to seeing from us with kind of the orange and purple. And oh, thank you so much about the compliment for soft cover. The thing that I tried to do with that from a design point of view was treat it from a weight point of view. So for shipping costs, not having the board binding it, and then also something that would be a little easier if you were trying to drop it into like a bag or a knapsack or something like that. It's a travel book to me. And so doing the French fold, that's not French fold, whatever the dust jacket curling in, and then the rounded spine. Those are things that, so the way that was put together felt to me almost like it was kind of in between hardcover and softcover. So we tried to do some things that were a little, a little elevated above what you would normally get from a paperback. They're not things that are terribly expensive, but when people are publishing soft covers or paperbacks and they're really trying to get the numbers down, that's one of the things that you have to lose. And so one of the beautiful things about us using Kickstarter so much and then just selling ourselves is that those little things that just cost an extra 75 cents, uh, if you're publishing traditionally, you've got to raise the book $6 if it costs 75 cents. Because by the time this person takes their 50%, and then there's the other 50%, and it just all gets broken up. Whereas for us, if it's 75 cents extra cost, it's really just 75 cents. And so, we can add those things up and, be comparable price-wise, but with lots of little bells and whistles that I notice as a design person. The Temple Van Het Vervel, I think that might have been in the old one. Maybe I'm wrong. The Destination Unknown was not in the old one. That Theater St. George, is a derivative of the Grand Guignol. The director of the Grand Guignol left and then started that theater. And so that was one that I'd been kind of coveting for a Grand Guignol book. But for this book, it just felt too perfect. And so that's why we put it in there. But yeah, that's one of my favorites as well. Paul Colon did a lot of really great Josephine Baker art in Paris in the 1930s. But he did a few posters for the Grand Guignol and for the and for the Theater St. George. And I love his work, and it's a really nice balance of feeling modernist, but also having what's the word? There's something that it has that it falls into what I like about the turn of the century posters. I think it's that it doesn't get too architectural in its line work. Paul Colon stays a little loose, and so it's kind of like Toulouse-Lautrec in an Art Deco sense or something. So that's one I really love. I'm glad you like that one. Kat messaged me with a suggestion. What are some things you pay attention to when designing books? She also said I should mention that we don't hire an agency or anything. I'm obsessed with books. I buy books every week. I love it's kind of like, there's a lot of times when I'd buy album covers for the design, especially if they had elements that were dimensional in some way. And so there are certainly lots of books that I have that are a little more utilitarian. And then one of the things that I feel like I've noticed is that the things that are utilitarian today are possibly someone else's interesting design element tomorrow. And so, for example, a lot of the little leather-bound books that I have, they were just pocket editions in the 1880s. They were meant to be cheap. But the paper that's almost like tissue paper and then, a single color with a metal stamp, it's something that then 140 years later feels so magical and so glorious to me. And so like the Le Pater hardcover, the design for that, the green leather, the hubs, the red that's on the spine, that comes from my binding of Le Pater from 1899. And of course, then the front cover is just green. And And so that's then when I get into my own thing and like the sigils down the side and what I do for the art. But the inspiration, the idea, it should be green, it should feel like an old Harry Potter tome. Like that was because of my experience with the original. And so with with something like Beautiful Macabre, it's kind of the same thing. I'm thinking about some of the French uh, books that I love the design of from the 20s, and you try to shift it a little bit into feeling contemporary, so that it doesn't look like a prop. Um, it's kind of a hard line because I like being preservationist with the images, but you want to put them in a package that will appeal to someone. Like the person I'm always thinking about is I'm thinking about me being 22 years old at Aspidistra bookstore in Chicago, seeing the first big Arthur Rackham book I ever saw, seeing the studio book with Michael Kaluta's art on the cover, thinking about those Time Life books that are the weird man, myth, and magic type stuff, um, and the first time I went to a book sale and saw old leather-bound books, and I really love those Barnes and Noble editions, whoever publishes those, that look kind of like old books, but in a mass-produced way. I think that that's a cool thing. I love the idea that there's a way to at least keep the idea of that aesthetic active. Um, what do I look for aside from the content itself? Sean, I buy some books for some fucking crazy reasons, dude. I bought a book. We had a fire in California coming over the hill, and so we wound up going to, I think it was Oceanside, to stay in a hotel. And there was a bookstore, and I bought a Danish book that to this day I don't know what it's about, but the end papers, not end papers, I'm so bad with the language on this. I'm going to point to it on a book. I'm holding two books together to get the size. This part, the paper outside, just it was like the palest blue, worn away by decades and decades. But then it had gold stars, tiny gold stars printed on it, and it's beautiful. And I remember laughing, thinking it's like $10 for a book that I can't read. But I just wanted to remember that design element. And I buy books like that all the time. So it's I do buy. I bought a bunch of books recently from a museum in France, that I won't translate. There's one that was an Edvard Munch book and one that was a Beardsley book, and I just bought them because I wanted to really get to feel the paper stock, see what they did, and then either adopt it or adapt it to something that I want to do. So I don't know that I smell the ink, but yes, paper texture, yes, weight. I'm a big fan of dimensionality. I really like spot varnishes. I mean, as you can tell from all of our books, I really like, one of the things I love about lithography, like when you're looking at the antique posters, is that they really feel dimensional. Everything in our culture today feels extremely two-dimensional to me. We listen to our music through a phone or computer speakers. We look at printing that's offset printing on semi-gloss or gloss paper. And when you think about earlier decades and certainly earlier centuries at this point, because it's the 20th century, when you think about music that would be coming from speakers that were spaced in a room, and you have dimensional air movement that creates space. Like, I really love that. When you look at stone lithographs or oil paintings or things like that, but when you're looking at the stone lithographs inside these books, the printing never comes close. It's just not as dimensional. And so that's something that, if I'm looking at a book and it's got a really interesting way of making me feel like the book is kind of a gateway into a dimensional experience, that's something I really like. Something that you'll notice in our books too. This is a really simple thing. If you, even in the Le Pater soft cover, if you look at it, all of those images have spot varnish. People don't ever do that on softcover books. They just don't, or paperbacks, whatever. But to me, it's one of those things. I mean, it's, yes, it's a few more dollars, but it just makes, like, when you're looking even at the page with the sacred geometry stuff, those shapes are all spot varnished. It just really adds dimensionality to me. So that was a long-winded way of explaining why it's that dimensional element. I don't know. I got a lot of allergies. I don't stick my face in a book in a bookstore like I did when I was young. The nitrate and Kino guy smelled like what? Like soy ink? You're a weird dude, Sean. I don't remember. I will tell you that our house smells like cardboard when we're packing, when there's 2,000 books and pallets of boxes, and that's a lot less pleasant. Kat pointed out the thing I was talking about is called the foredge, the outside paper edges of the book. I always forget that stuff. Kat also suggested, what's the most beautiful book that I've seen, bought, or held recently? I'm trying to think of what. A lot of the books I've been reading recently are pretty utilitarian in terms of their design. I've been reading a lot of stuff about music, history, and those are just kind of more floppy. So I'm trying to think of like what. I will say that, and I mentioned this in that post recently, the Johann Lossel book, because when we had them here to send to the higher tier patrons, Johann signed some for people for me. That book, it's so funny because he commented, I didn't even realize he was on as a patron, but he commented and said how much he loves what I do. And it's funny because there's a guy, my friend who passed away, Joe Cassidy, and he wrote a song called Drunk on Beauty. And I remember when I heard it, I just didn't like him. And the reason was because I was so jealous that it was such a perfect song. And so the funny thing is, the sentiment comes, it is a mixed feeling of where it's like you want to know this person, but then you're also like, they did it. I do have that a little bit with Johann with this book. He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And then there's that part of me that's like, I think that it's as good or better than anything we've published. I have to be honest. If you don't have the Johann Lossel Forgotten Gods book, it's so beautifully done. The paper texture is glorious. The separations are great. Like, he paints with gold leaf, and that's impossible to reproduce without this extra attention that they gave to it. So I'm going to say that I don't think that there's anything that I've held recently that's that's at that level. I've got a lot of beautiful books, but that's one I just love. I love, and so I say all that, half joking because I'm not really upset and jealous, but it is that thing of like, you know, it makes me want to do something like that. It makes me want to, you know, to do something that requires that extra complicated color separating and or like with the Animalia book, I will say this. Uh, I'm getting into a different kind of paper for that. Really, and I think probably his book has something to do with that. I really want to try with the Animalia book to not spot varnish, but to use a more textural, uncoated paper so that instead of trying to make it pop out at you, um, make it feel almost a little more like you're flipping through a book of things that might have been hand watercolored inside the book. Um, and so, it'll be really cool. It'll be different. And I'm excited about that. But yeah, so Johann Lassell, Forgotten Gods. What is the most beautifully presented graphic novel or comics omnibus I own or have come across? I I'm I don't think that they're ever great. I don't think that they're ever great. Uh, I have some older ones, like I have that Saga de Zam book, XAM, which is a 1960s like French psychedelic comic book, and it's printed on uncoated paper, like I just said, and so the acidic colors, it feels kind of like a 1960s poster or something, like a silk screen or something that you'd see on the streets of San Francisco or something. And so the thing that happens with modern comics is that the ones that are more Fantagraphics type things, they'll use uncoated stocks, and it's usually art that's a little blockier or more monochromatic. And then when you get into the stuff that's more comic booky, they're always using coated stocks. And something that I love about like old Creepy or Eerie or Vampirella, or even just old comics that I love, uh, I love that feel of that paper stock. I saw someone had written a review of our witchcraft comic that we did, the compilation, and they mentioned the paper stock, and I was really glad they did. And it was the same thing. We tried to make it feel like an updated version of the old ones. And so I just don't feel like anybody does that. I've bought, I do buy omnibuses, how do you say? I do buy things when they're enlarged. I like to see the art better. But I always feel a little bit like it's always listening to the record, but never being at the concert. Like it's always like, and I will say this. One thing that I did get that I did like is I got the X-Men, that artist edition of the John Byrne art. Um, and that was kind of a nice experience just because of the scale. Like seeing his artwork at original size was really cool. But again, when you're looking at that in person, the paper is matte, but the ink from the brush has a different patina to it that you just don't get in a book like this. So, you know, I mean, I'm in super critical designer mode answering that question. I tend to just be reading. If it's comic book related, I tend to be reading them for the content and just generally not examining the physical experience in the same way. Uh, 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 uh. Kat, keeping me in good questions. As someone who loves and promotes the experience of enjoying physical books, do you also enjoy the tactile experience when it comes to writing or sketching out ideas on a physical page or notebook? I, my desk is literally just filled with. I do quite a bit. I do like writing things down. I'm not great moving as quickly digitally as I am physically. And I think it's because a lot of my notes aren't linear. It'll be where there's ideas that kind of come out like a constellation. And so if I'm typing like in a document, I kind of have to keep it as a list. Whereas if I don't know if I've got one here that's a good example, but I don't know if this is, there's lots of stuff with, where's it go? There's lots of stuff with arrows. What is this? Oh, these are the notes I took while on a phone call with Malcolm. I was like, who's Claire Bloom? Oh, that was who Gore Vidal wanted to play Caesonia. And I didn't know that, but Malcolm told me. So yeah, these are notes from a phone call with Malcolm. I mean, I guess I can tell you this stuff. So, I guess if anybody here cares about Caligula, yeah, Gore wanted Claire Bloom, which was an actress that I had to look up. And then Malcolm suggested Helen. And after Maria Schneider was fired, Malcolm got a call at the villa where he was staying from Catherine Ross from The Graduate, saying that they had asked her to do the role. And he said, I didn't write this down, but whatever it was something along the lines of run away as fast as you can. And then that's when they got Teresa Ann Savoy. So anyway, yeah, little Caligula tidbits. I mentioned the influence of the original Le Pater book on the recent publication. I would love to know what other books from the turn of the century containing illustrated theme plates are of interest to you for future publications. I was reading that slowly because as I was looking ahead, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And then you put the 1 and the 2 and it made sense. So that's why I was reading like that. What other books from the turn of the century are of interest? I mean, the big one is the Animalia book that just came out. Things like the Doré Bible and the Rubaiyat have been reprinted beautifully so many times that while I own copies of them and adore them, I don't feel that they need my help. And so I'm trying to think if there are any books that I look at that there aren't really any that are coming to my mind right now. It wasn't as much that I looked at the Le Pater that I had and said, oh, I should copy that design, as much as it was we did the catalog, the little 80, 60 page, whatever, 60 page, 80, 60 page, I think, soft cover. And then when it did so well, and I realized that there was an audience to do this right, that then when I said, okay, now we're going to present this in a larger sense, what can I look at? And for me, I always just take the path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is, in my head and in my heart, a Le Pater book like that was going to be green because that's just what I had and what I'd experienced. And so it was just kind of a natural progression. And then, and a lot of it's designed too, like with the Animalia book, the folio that came in was like a brownish color. And I'd thought, okay, when we make this book, we're going to make it like a brown faux leather. But then we were getting into the jewel tones of the dragons. And it was just like, I wanted to be like a, I was like, I want it to be like a Disney Harry Potter experience. I want someone who's 50 to love the book, but I really want someone who's like me when I was 25 to think this is the coolest book I've seen. And so it's like, the purple with the gold and the red and, greens of the dragons. And so it's very rare that I don't know really quickly what it should look like. But so when it comes to these older books, a lot of it is fragments. When I was doing the Beautiful Macabre book, I just was walking through one of the hallways here and just looking at some of the cloth-bound books that had that little curve to it, the round edge. I don't have one here. And just thinking it was just it felt like, God, what were the books? There were just some like 1940s books on like mysticism and stuff. And I just thought it felt a little more important than a flat spine. And so that was an element that I was like, okay, I'm gonna steal that. Is there a book that I have here that I kind of wish could be kind of reproduced in its entirety the way it is? I can't think of any. Because, like, I'm just going to say, like, I mentioned Saga des Âmes. And the interior's great, but the cover's just a regular cloth-bound thing with a paper cover. If I was republishing that, I would do a crazy cover to really escalate the contents. And with some of the other books that I have that have really, really cool covers, the text that's inside is not really anything that would be, something that would be, it's not like they're great art books or anything. I feel like I did a terrible job at saying something interesting, but that's kind of, I think that's, the answer would have just been no, and I didn't want to just say no. There's not anything in particular, but that's kind of the process, is it's usually more, there's a content that I want to share, and then my brain says, well, then now what can I pull to show something? And yeah, there's great Kai Nielsen books. When you look at and Edmund Dulac, like when you look at a lot of those artists, they've been so well represented. There's so many beautiful Arthur Rackham books that the place where we try to dabble is there's all these artists that I remember there was a guy that was at my house once, and I mentioned Joseph Peladon. He was talking about the Salon Rosacroix. And I said it like he wouldn't know who it was. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, everyone knows Saw Peladon. And I just laughed out loud. I was like, no, they don't. And so artists like Joseph Fennick or Walter Schnackenberg, when you talk about a famous artist like Mucha, but you look at Le Pater, and artists like Anton Cedar, those dragons and snakes have been a part of my life for decades. Um, but if I mention Anton Cedar outside of a really narrow illustration group, people don't know who it is. So that's why we focus on those artists. I remember when I first met Charles Vess, he was asking about Heinrich Leffler, and that was just such a joy to talk about Heinrich Leffler with someone. Um, so yeah, so that's it. But I love that people are, there are so many really cool. And Amelia is the adult tasteful art version of the Barnes and Noble specials on dragons. Honestly, that is, we're laughing, but it really is what I'm going for. The thing that I want to do, I remember being at Barnes and Noble and flipping through a little book and seeing like a bat belt buckle. There was some kind of iridescent enamel, and I remember buying like the bullshit Barnes and Noble Art Nouveau book, and I don't know, what was I, 17, 18, and it changing my life. And so the good thing is now with the internet, you don't have to be in a store that way. But I really do. There's a lot of people that really love academic books where it's white paper, white pages. You put the measurements of everything to the millimeter in the credit, all of that. And I always feel like, I'm not saying that younger people wouldn't look at that. Not younger people, less purely academic minded people wouldn't just look past that and be interested. But I really, really am always thinking about, like, there's a big territory of people that if you know about it and love it, you're cool if it's a little inclusive. Um, and if you make it that inclusive version of a thing, you're making it a book that you can give as a gift to a much wider group of people. You're making it a book that someone that may not already love this thing can develop a love for it. And so those Barnes and Noble cheap books that are by the front, I used to buy those by the armload, and maybe I didn't think that I wanted to know about, broadswords of the Middle East in the 7th century, but if there was a 9.95 book on it, maybe I was going to read that. And so, it's obviously harder because our books are at a different price point than that. But I do love that idea that they found a way to make things interesting. And so we try to be an elevated version of that, both in printing and in content and in commentary. Like, we do try to make it where you can be a 60-year-old professor with multiple degrees, and you'll still find it really informative and engaging, hopefully. Mm. I don't think I know John Bauer. I'll look it up. Um, yeah, I mean, I love Brian. I love Brian Froud. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Taschen. They do some really, really cool things, but they definitely cut every corner that they can. Um, I don't know if they have shareholders or whatever, but they are a profitable business, um, and more power to them. They publish a lot of things that introduce a lot of things into the culture that would otherwise be lost, and that's super important. Um, but I've bought a couple Taschen things recently. Like, I think we did the Kai Nielsen one we did get. Um, but I love Norman Lindsay. Um, oh, John Bauer was, but anyway, so Taschen cuts a lot of corners, and so I feel like I'm more inclined to be looking at like Black Letter Press or some of these Is it Thorn Willow that does all the letterpress books? Like I kind of am, I try to put my money there a little bit, or like at this point in my life, I'm probably, if I were going to buy a Kai Nielsen book, really, I probably would look for an original, um, just kind of for that. Uh, John Bauer, yeah, you know what? You know what? It's now that you're saying this, I know who mentioned this to me. Yep. My friends Jay and Fred own Conan the Barbarian. They're doing the comic stuff now with Titan, but they're fans of John Bauer, and I remember having this exact same conversation probably 15 years ago with them. So yes, I know the art. I just he's not someone that really clicked in my head. I think I didn't see him until later. Um, yeah. And Norman Lindsay is another artist that I don't know much about. It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. Like what are the lessons that I want my kid to know? And one of them is that don't ever be ashamed of what you don't know, because there's just so much that you can fit into your head, or only so much. And I remember my friend once laughing that I didn't know who George Seurat was, because we've got at the Chicago Art Institute the big, you know, the park painting. And I just laughed. I was like, give me a break. I know who Carlo Schwab is. Like there's only so much. And so a lot of the artists like Norman Lindsay, like when I see their work, I do love it. I think I only have probably like one overview of him. So if someone started trying to engage me on, oh, did you see this thing? I would be really bad with that. Another person like that is Virgil Finlay. Great stuff, great stuff. But I think I might only own one thing. I think that a lot of the stuff that was well covered, didn't, like even artists like Arthur Rackham, who I love dearly, were artists I got into earlier. And then once I started discovering, you know, the Weimar Republic artists and, the artists that you couldn't get books in English on and stuff like that, I think that maybe my comic collector, hunter-gatherer brain started to kick in, and you start to get into that stuff, and it's just so weird. That I think that's just why it happened, because I have a huge gap in my education in terms of if I'm sitting with guys that are into pulp art and things like that. I don't know any of these American artists' names. Recognize the work and love it, but on the other hand, if you want to talk about German illustrators, it's obscene, the the quantity of names that I can't pronounce, that I could identify immediately just from seeing a corner of a drawing. Jeremy Bash and I talked about John Bauer. It makes sense that Jeremy would like that art. Jeremy Bastian, if anyone here is not familiar, he did Cursed Pirate Girl. He's probably one of the best artists I've ever seen, ever. And the art just doesn't reproduce well. His books are worth getting, but they're so good in person. It's like he's painting with a single hair brush, this black and white line work. But he's really interested in where fantasy and like fairy tale illustration converge. And so again, probably a conversation where he and I could only have like some tangential areas that connected. But it would make sense that someone as outstanding as John Bauer would be on his radar. You know, what happened the other day, I was talking to Jason Mowry, and he mentioned someone that did a Hobbit book, and I can't remember the name, but it was an artist that I hadn't thought of in, God, I don't know, 30 years or something like that. And so it's interesting what artists people will latch onto. There's somebody else that Jeremy used to talk about, and he did something like a scary stories type book or something, some children's book that just had always stuck with him. Uh, that I just hadn't even remembered the book since, in the last 45 years or something like that. But that's one of the cool things about when you go back into art history, to me, is that there's always more. And so if you're a creative person, whether it's music or writing or book design or painting or anything, there's always an answer to the problem somewhere in a library. And so when there's a line that I love in Sting's "Be Still My Beating Heart." He sings, "I've been through every single book I know to soothe the thoughts that plague me so." And I think about, if I'm trying to figure out how to get something into a certain direction, like if you're interested in, if you're trying to figure out how to make something more peaceful, well, then maybe you're going to wind up looking at Impressionism. And maybe your style of art isn't even a visual art. Maybe it's maybe you're a writer, but something in that pulls the language out of you. Yeah, I think Michael Haig is I think that's the artist that Jason was talking about, Sean. But yeah, and so for me, I'm really, I'm really, really focused personally. Germany from like 1890 through 1925, personally, is the spot that I think that a lot of the thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid things feeling saccharine is one of the big things. I like a lot of really schmaltzy pop music from the 70s. And so when I'm working, there's kind of like a groove that I can get into in terms of, things kind of moving in a lilting way. And so visually, something that I'm always trying to do is, especially if you're looking at Art Nouveau, you're looking at things that are perhaps a little more romantic in nature, is it is always like, okay, but where's the dirt under the fingernails? And to me, nobody did that better than the Germans. And a lot of the things that happened in America, I feel like the best of it was influenced by the Germans and perhaps the Italians and Austrians. And so that's, yeah, anyway, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm answering the question at this point. I think I'm so sorry. This is what happens when you give me a microphone and there's no one in front of me. But, talking about these artists like John Bauer and Michael Haig and Virgil Finlay and stuff like that, I think that it's just, I kind of went into the crevices of Weimar, Munich, and Berlin in 1919 and 20 and 21. That's why those Orchid Garden books I loved so much. That's why I'm really loving doing this Jugendstil stuff. It's the origin of comic art in so many ways. There's so much art that looks like Michael Allred, or when you can't look at Mike Mignola and not see all these German artists. I mean, it's what it is. So yeah. So anyway, that was a roundabout, I guess, pitch for getting the Jugendstil books to people, but there's a lot there. Another thing is anytime you see one of those names in a book, I would highly recommend doing a Google image search. Um, there's just so much stuff that's out there. And each one is kind of its own world. Like someone like Bruno Paul, who I love a lot. He's in these Jugendstil books, but he designed the first furniture that was like modular modernist furniture for people's homes. And so when you think about that through the 20s and 30s, as an architect, he was changing the way we experience our living spaces. But then in the 1890s and early 20th century, he was creating some of the most powerful graphic work anywhere. I just think that's super exciting. I love multidisciplinary artists um, and the way that those overlap. I was just thinking, actually, I can close with a Stanley Kubrick story. I was on a call today with Mike Kaplan, and Mike Kaplan was the PR agent for Clockwork Orange. And he was talking about the artist that made the poster, that they really wanted that font to be integral to the whole design of the image. And so he really pushed the artist to do the font as well. And so the thing that was discussed on the call was how the artist didn't want to do it, but then found that he was great at font design. And so it just kind of opened up this conversation about how, there is that thing that we do where it's like if you're good at one thing, people kind of stay in there. And sometimes when something pulls you out of it, you can find this whole other beautiful place to blossom. And so the fact that this artist then became successful with designing fonts was the point of that story. But I love how much of these artists from the turn of the century, maybe they were starting in poster art, but then by the end of their career, they were designing buildings. I just think it's beautiful. I think it's super cool. I love the idea of being in a world where everything, the architecture, the silverware, that all of it, that somebody is at an artistic mind. And then really quickly, we're in the end here. Do I think there's enough surviving material to do a book on Joseph Fenneker? I will tell you a secret. I haven't really talked about it because it's something that I didn't want someone else to do, but I feel confident now that no one would do it as well as I would. And that is that I really want to do a Joseph Fenneker book. At this point, I've been for about, for 20 something years now, I've been finding articles about him. I've been buying old magazines if they have a little Fenneker thing. And so I've spent the attention that I did on Le Pater. The end result will be much closer in scale to a beautiful macabre because there just isn't that much. It's not like Mucha where you can find photographs of the pavilions at the World's Fair and things like that. I have some photographs of the Marmor House in Berlin where he created the murals inside, so I do photographs of those. But it's not like Mucha where you could do pages and pages of things like that. But yeah, Fenneker is one of my favorite artists, and we are very, very overbooked this year, especially with Caligula coming out in theaters and all of that. But alongside doing a really cool Grand Guignol book, I've thought about. All right, it's 9:00. We got to go. But I'll say this: think about this, because this is what I don't have the answer to. I'd also thought about doing a Stackenberg book. And the thing I was trying to determine is if I should do a book for each of those people, or if I should be trying to do something on that cabaret and cinema culture and just try to make it a larger book. Because Schnackenberg is another one. There's even less on Schnackenberg, but he's so good and so important. And I've accumulated a lot of information. But so, that's kind of the stuff that I wrestle with. And when I'm not really sure, then it just kind of stays on the back burner. So if you have opinions, send me a message. Because that's what I've been wrestling with. Should it just be a Fenneker book, or should it be like, a title that includes the names Schnackenberg, Fenneker, and then some kind of descriptive term. That's a cliffhanger ending. So whether you are here live or if you are watching this later in our archive, thank you for being here. We're grateful for you being here and for supporting our mission to promote creation and connection through art books. Can you tell when I started reading? We try to do these kind of as a replacement for not having the physical gallery to hang out in. But so if there's ever stuff that you want me to talk about, I don't ever feel like I really get to, I hope some of this helps or is interesting, but I don't feel like I'm ever really being as helpful as I'd like to be. If anybody has even really specific questions about anything, and you want to treat this like a book club or something, if you send things, to us or comment on Patreon or something, and I'm happy to do a little research before coming on and, and giving a little more data on things that maybe, that maybe I can go deeper on. But first Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. Pacific time, we are here. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next month. Thank you again so much.